The town of Millfield had one gas station, one diner, and exactly 0 reasons to stay. That's what everyone said anyway. The kids who grew up there couldn't wait to leave. The adults who stayed had mostly given up on leaving. And the old people sat on their porches in the evening and watched the sun go down over the cornfields like they were watching the same movie for the 10,000th time. Jake Calloway was 17 years old, and he had never been further than 40 miles from Millfield in his entire life. Jake was not remarkable. That's the honest truth, and he knew it better than anyone. He was average height, average grades. He worked after school at his uncle's hardware store, sweeping floors and counting nails and trying not to fall asleep standing up. His mother worked double shifts at the diner. His father had left when Jake was 6 and sent a birthday card exactly once, 2 years late, with the wrong name written inside. Every evening Jake would sit on the back steps of their small house, look out at the flat, empty fields stretching to the horizon, and think the same thought he thought every single evening. There has to be something more than this. He didn't know what that something was. He just knew it wasn't here. His one escape was numbers. Not in a school way. Jake's math grades were perfectly ordinary. But in his head, numbers moved like music. He could calculate things instantly. Probabilities. Patterns. If you flipped a coin 15 times and got heads 12 times, Jake could tell you immediately how strange that was and why. He didn't know why his brain worked this way. It just did. His uncle called it a useless gift. Jake was starting to believe him. It was a Tuesday in October when everything changed. And it changed, as most important things do, completely by accident. Jake was taking a shortcut home through the old Hadley property, an abandoned farm on the edge of town that kids avoided because of vague rumors about ghosts and trespassing fines. He wasn't thinking about anything in particular. Just walking, hands in his pockets, watching his breath fog in the cold air. Then he heard it, coming from inside the old barn. Not a ghost. Something stranger. The quiet, precise sound of cards being shuffled. Jake stopped, pushed the barn door open an inch, and looked inside. There was a man sitting alone at a wooden table in the center of the barn. Old, maybe 70, maybe older, it was hard to tell. White-haired. Perfectly still. He was dealing cards to 4 empty seats with the smooth, automatic precision of someone who had done it so many times it had become like breathing. He didn't look up when the door creaked. "You going to stand there in the cold all night?" the old man said quietly, "or are you going to come in and sit down?" Jake's first instinct was to run. His second instinct, the one he listened to, was curiosity. He walked in and sat down across from the old man. The man looked up for the first time. His eyes were sharp and dark and completely calm. The kind of eyes that made you feel like he had already figured out everything about you before you opened your mouth. "Do you know what this is?" the old man asked, tapping the deck of cards with one finger. "Cards," Jake said. The old man almost smiled. "Almost. Wrong," he said. "This is a mirror. It shows you exactly who you are. Most people can't stand to look." His name, he said, was Henry. Just Henry. He had no interest in explaining what he was doing in an abandoned barn in a town like Millfield. He asked Jake 3 questions. Not about poker. About life. About how Jake thought. About what Jake was afraid of. Jake answered honestly. He wasn't sure why. Something about Henry made lying feel pointless. When Jake finished talking, Henry was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up the deck, shuffled it once with a single clean motion, and dealt 2 cards face down in front of Jake. "Pick them up," Henry said. Jake picked them up. A 2 of clubs and a 7 of hearts. The worst possible starting hand in poker. He knew that much from watching television. "What do you have?" Henry asked. "Nothing," Jake said. "It's a terrible hand." "Yes," Henry said. "It is." He leaned forward slightly. "Now, what are you going to do about it?" They sat in that barn for 3 hours that first night. Henry didn't teach Jake the rules of poker. He assumed Jake could learn those from a book. Instead, he talked about something else entirely. He talked about people. "Poker is not about cards," Henry said, dealing hand after hand in the lamplight. "Cards are just the excuse everyone uses to sit down at the same table. What the game is really about, what it has always been about, is reading what is happening inside another person's mind while showing them absolutely nothing of what is happening inside yours." He made Jake look at him and try to guess what cards he was holding. Just from his face, his breathing, the way he held his shoulders, the speed at which he picked up his cards. Jake was terrible at it. He guessed wrong every single time. Henry seemed pleased by this. "Good," he said. "You're honest about what you don't know. That is rarer than you think. Most people guess wrong and then convince themselves they were right. That is the most dangerous kind of player. The one who is confident and wrong." When Jake finally stood up to leave, numb with cold and buzzing with something he couldn't quite name, he paused at the barn door. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "Teaching me, I mean. You don't even know me." Henry looked at him for a moment. Something moved behind those dark, steady eyes. "I knew someone like you once," he said quietly. "A long time ago. Someone who had a gift they didn't know how to use yet. I wasn't there to help him in time." He picked up the deck and began to shuffle again with that effortless, automatic grace. "Consider this a debt I am paying to the universe." Jake walked home through the cold, dark fields with 2 things he hadn't had that morning: a direction and a teacher. Neither of them knew yet just how far those 2 things would take him. But the cards were on the table now, and the game had begun. Jake went back to the barn the next evening, and the evening after that, and every evening after that for the next 3 months. He never told anyone. Not his mother. Not his friends at school. Partly because he knew how it would sound. "I've been spending my evenings in an abandoned barn with a mysterious old man learning poker," and partly because what was happening in that barn felt too important, too fragile, to expose to other people's opinions just yet. It was the first secret Jake had ever kept that felt worth keeping. Henry's teaching methods were unlike anything Jake had ever experienced in a classroom. There were no textbooks, no worksheets, no encouragement in the ordinary sense of the word. Henry never said "good job" or "you're getting better" or any of the things teachers said to make students feel comfortable. What Henry said, most of the time, was "again." He would set up a scenario, deal the cards, watch Jake make a decision, and then, regardless of whether the decision was right or wrong, he would collect the cards, shuffle, and say the same word. "Again." Some nights Jake left the barn feeling sharper and more alive than he had ever felt in his life. Some nights he walked home in the dark feeling stupid and hollow, replaying every mistake in his head. Henry seemed equally satisfied by both reactions. "Comfort is the enemy of growth," he said one night, watching Jake shuffle the deck with hands that were finally beginning to develop some confidence. "The moment you feel comfortable is the moment you stop paying attention. And the moment you stop paying attention at a poker table, someone takes everything you have." But the lessons were never only about poker. Henry made Jake read. Not poker books, though those came later. He made Jake read books about psychology, about human behavior, about the way people make decisions under pressure, under stress, under the sweet, corrupting influence of greed. He made Jake study body language until Jake could walk into a room and within 60 seconds have a rough map of who was nervous, who was confident, who was pretending to be confident, and who was genuinely dangerous. People cannot help themselves, Henry said. They leak. Every emotion they feel finds a way out of the body. Your job is to watch the leaks. And to make sure you have none of your own. About 6 weeks in, Jake made a mistake that changed everything. He got overconfident. Henry had been drilling a particular concept, pot odds, the mathematical relationship between the size of the bet and the size of the pot, and Jake had finally understood it so completely, so deeply, that he felt almost invincible. Like he had cracked a code. Henry dealt a hand. Jake looked at his cards, a strong hand, genuinely strong, and bet aggressively. Too aggressively. With the kind of confidence that broadcasts itself across a table like a shout. Henry called him. Calmly. Without a flicker of expression. And when the final card was turned over, Henry laid down a hand that crushed Jake's completely. Jake stared at the cards. You had that the whole time? Yes, Henry said. Then why did you let me bet so much? Why didn't you raise me earlier? Henry looked at him with those steady dark eyes. Because I wanted you to feel exactly what you are feeling right now. Jake felt his face go hot. That's not fair. No, Henry agreed. It is not. Welcome to poker. He leaned forward. You knew the mathematics tonight. Your hand selection was correct. Your pot odds calculation was perfect. But you forgot the most important thing. He paused. There is always another person on the other side of the table. And that person has a plan too. Jake sat with that for a long moment. So how do you beat someone who is also thinking? He asked. Henry almost smiled. It was the closest thing to a smile Jake had ever seen from him. Now, Henry said quietly, you're asking the right question. In January, 4 months after that first night in the barn, Henry told Jake it was time. There was a small regional poker tournament being held in a town 2 hours away. Entry level. Low stakes. The kind of event where retired businessmen and college kids and semi-serious hobbyists came to test themselves against people slightly better than their usual home game crowd. Henry would not be coming with him. But I'm not ready, Jake said immediately. You are not ready, Henry agreed without hesitation. Go anyway. Jake drove there on a Saturday morning in his uncle's borrowed truck, hands tight on the wheel, stomach doing slow, uncomfortable turns the whole way. He registered. Sat down. Looked around the table at 11 strangers and tried to remember everything Henry had taught him. He lasted 4 hours. He finished 9th out of 42 players. He did not win any money. He drove home in the dark feeling like he had failed completely. Henry was waiting at the barn when he arrived. 9th, Jake said, dropping into his chair. Tell me every hand you played, Henry said. So Jake told him. Every decision. Every bet. Every fold. Henry listened without interrupting, eyes closed, completely still. When Jake finished, Henry opened his eyes. You made 3 mistakes, he said. The same mistake, 3 different times. Do you know what it was? Jake thought about it. Replayed the hands in his head. I folded when I shouldn't have, he said slowly. When I had the right odds to call. I got scared and I folded. Yes, Henry said. Fear. He said the word like it was a diagnosis. Fear dressed up as caution. Fear wearing the costume of good sense. It is the most common mistake at every level of this game. From beginners to world champions. He looked at Jake steadily. The difference between a good player and a great player is not intelligence. It is the ability to act correctly even when every nerve in your body is screaming at you to hide. Jake nodded slowly. Something was settling inside him. a kind of quiet, solid determination he hadn't felt before. "How do I fix it?" he asked. Henry stood up. For the first time in 4 months, he walked around the table and sat down directly across from Jake. Not at an angle. Not at the side. Directly opposite. Eye to eye. He dealt 2 cards to each of them. "We fix it," Henry said, "by doing it again. And again. Until the fear has nothing left to say to you." Outside the barn, the January wind pushed through the empty cornfields with a long, cold sigh. Inside, 2 people sat across from each other in the lamplight. And the real education began. 8 months after that first cold night in the barn, Jake Calloway sat in the back seat of a taxi in Las Vegas, watching the city slide past the window like something from another planet. The lights, the noise, the sheer impossible scale of everything. Hotels the size of small towns. Crowds moving in every direction at once. The air itself felt different here, charged and restless and faintly desperate, like the whole city was running on pure adrenaline and bad decisions. Jake pressed his forehead against the cool glass and thought about Millfield. About the hardware store. About his mother's tired face when she came home from the diner at midnight. About a teenage boy sitting on back porch steps staring at flat, empty fields and thinking there has to be something more than this. He almost laughed. He was about to play in the National Poker Championship, one of the most prestigious tournaments in the country. 3 days of competition. 217 players. A prize pool large enough to change several lives. And he was 18 years old. He had not arrived here overnight. After that first tournament in January, Jake had spent the next 8 months doing exactly what Henry told him to do. He played every small tournament within driving distance. He won some. He lost more than he won. He drove home in the dark after bad beats with Henry's voice in his head, dissecting every mistake with the calm, precise attention of a surgeon. He got better. Quietly. Steadily. The way water wears down rock, not dramatically, not all at once, but consistently, day after day, until one morning you look at the rock and realize it is a completely different shape than it used to be. By spring he was winning regularly at regional level. By summer he had qualified for 2 mid-level national events and finished in the money at both. In September, he qualified for the national championship on his first attempt, finishing in the top 3 of a brutal 2-day qualifying tournament that knocked out players with 10 times his experience. Henry said nothing when Jake told him. Just nodded once. Dealt the cards. Said the word he always said. Again. But on the evening before Jake left for Las Vegas, something different happened. Henry put down the deck. He looked at Jake for a long, quiet moment. And then he said something he had never said in 8 months of teaching. "You are ready." Just that. 3 words. But coming from Henry, they landed like a thunderclap. The first 2 days of the tournament were unlike anything Jake had experienced. The level of play was extraordinary. These were not retired businessmen and college kids. These were professionals. People who had spent decades at tables around the world. People with sponsorships and television appearances and poker faces so perfectly constructed they might as well have been wearing masks. Jake watched them the way Henry had taught him. Not their cards. Not their chips. Them. The way they breathed. The way they stacked their chips between hands. The tiny involuntary movements that happened in the half-second after they looked at their whole cards before the professional mask clicked back into place. He played tight. Patient. Disciplined. He folded hands that felt painful to fold. He waited for his spots with a stillness that several players at his table found unnerving in someone so young. By the end of day 1, he had doubled his starting stack. By the end of day 2, he was in the top 20. On the morning of day 3, he woke up at 5 a.m. in his hotel room, sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, and called Henry. Henry answered on the second ring. Jake wasn't surprised. He suspected Henry never really slept. "I'm scared," Jake said. Just that. No explanation needed. Henry was quiet for a moment. "Good," he said. "Fear means you understand what is at stake. The players you need to worry about are the ones who feel nothing." A pause. "But Jake, listen to me carefully." "I'm listening. Everything I have taught you, the mathematics, the psychology, the patience, the discipline, all of it has been preparation. But preparation is not the same as the moment itself. When you sit down at that final table today, you will not need to remember my lessons. They are already inside you. Trust what is inside you." Jake sat with that for a moment. "What if it's not enough?" he asked quietly. "Then it is not enough," Henry said simply. "And you will learn from it. And you will come back." Another pause, shorter this time. "But I do not think that is what is going to happen today. 9 players. 1 table. The lights above it so bright it felt like sitting inside the sun." Jake looked around at the 8 other faces. Professionals, every one. 2 of them he recognized from television. One of them, a broad-shouldered man in his 40s named Carver, known in poker circles as the most unreadable player in the country, had won this tournament twice before. Carver looked at Jake across the table with the flat and curious expression of someone who has already decided the outcome of a situation. Jake looked back at him calmly. And something clicked into place. Something quiet and solid and absolutely certain. The fear that had been sitting in his chest all morning simply left. Not because the situation wasn't dangerous, but because Jake suddenly understood, with complete clarity, that he belonged here. He had earned the seat. The cards were dealt. For hours later, it was down to 2 players, Jake and Carver. The crowd around the table had grown enormous. Cameras everywhere. The noise of the room a constant low roar that Jake had stopped hearing an hour ago. Carver was good. Genuinely, frighteningly good. He had more experience in his little finger than Jake had in his entire body. He applied pressure constantly, relentlessly, with the quiet confidence of someone who had broken younger players 100 times before. But Jake watched him, the way Henry had taught him. And somewhere in the second hour of their heads-up battle, Jake saw it. Just once. Just for half a second. When Carver picked up a particularly strong hand, his right thumb moved. A tiny circular motion against the edge of his chip stack. So small, so brief, that no camera in the room would catch it. That no player without 8 months of the most intense observational training imaginable would notice. But Jake noticed. 3 hands later, Carver did it again. And Jake knew. The final hand came down to a single massive bet. Carver pushed all his remaining chips into the center of the table with the smooth, unhurried confidence of a man who has never doubted himself in his life. The crowd went quiet. Every camera in the room pointed at Jake's face. Jake looked at his cards. Looked at the pile of chips in the center of the table. Looked at Carver's face, perfectly still, perfectly controlled, absolutely unreadable to anyone who didn't know what to look for. Then he looked at Carver's right hand. Still. Completely still. Jake pushed his chips in. "Call," he said quietly. Carver turned over his cards. A strong hand. A very strong hand. The crowd murmured. Jake turned over his own cards. Stronger. The table erupted. Later, much later, after the trophy and the cameras and the check and the handshakes and the stunned congratulations of people who had never heard of a boy from Millfield, Illinois, Jake sat alone in the back of a taxi heading back to his hotel. He looked out at the Las Vegas lights the same way he had looked at them 3 days ago. But everything was different now. He was different now. He took out his phone and called Henry. "I won," he said. A long silence. Then Henry's voice, quieter than usual. Something in it Jake had never heard before. "I know," Henry said. "I watched." Jake blinked. "You were here." "I have been here since day one," Henry said simply. "I just didn't want you to know. I didn't want you playing for me. I wanted you playing for yourself." Jake stared out the window for a moment. The lights blurred slightly. "Henry," he said. "That person you mentioned. The one you couldn't help in time. Who was it?" The longest silence yet. "Me," Henry said softly. "It was me. A long time ago. A different barn. A different town. A different boy who had a gift and no one to show him how to use it." A pause. "Until now." Jake didn't say anything for a while. There was nothing to say that the silence didn't already say better. "Thank you," he finally said. "Don't thank me," Henry said. And this time Jake could hear it clearly, the thing that had always been hidden underneath the stern, quiet exterior. Something warm. Something proud. Something that sounded remarkably like love. "You did this," Henry said. "All I did was deal the cards.